Yay Networks.
I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. I am really excited for y'all to hear this week's episode. We are talking about our gut microbiome, and something that you hear about, and you hear about gut health all the time, but it's so hard for us to visualize it. And I don't think many of us, or maybe most of us, realize just quite the vital role and the impact that our gut microbiome has on pretty much every facet of our being. So we think about gut health and we think about digestive issues, or we think about gut health and we're starting to relate that more to our immune system. But when we also relate it to our mood, we relate it to our joint health. We can really relate our gut health. These microbes that are in there are responsible for so many of the things that we just think are maybe part of our genetic makeup, part of our characteristics, and it all goes back to our gut health. So I'm joined today by Tim Spector. He is a brilliant mind in the field of our gut microbiomes, and I'll share more about Professor Spector in just a bit. But he and I will be talking about what is our gut microbiome. It's starting to enter this conversation of mainstream medicine. Finally, we're learning more and more about it. What is it? Helping us visualize it, and what are the repercussions if we just don't get it right? He'll talk with us about how our gut microbiome influences our weight, our cravings, obesity, our mood, all these aspects of our well-being that we just have no idea. And then how do we optimize this microbiome? What are the things that we can easily start doing right now to help optimize it? And what are some of the things that we are overcomplicating? And even more importantly, what are we oversimplifying? And I really love his approach and his outlook of, let's don't judge the quality of an entire food by a number of how much fiber or how much protein or how much sugar. Yes, these things are important, but those metrics alone, simply because something is high fiber or high protein or low sugar, doesn't necessarily make that wholesome, nourishing food. He'll be sharing with us his opinion on sweeteners. I can't wait for y'all to hear this. We'll talk about sugar, or traditional table sugar, but also the impact of artificial sweeteners on gut health, and then plant-based sweeteners on gut health. And then some of those things that you may hear on different types of diet plans that are supposedly better: coconut sugar, maple syrup. How do these relate to gut health, and how do our microbes and our gut microbiome respond to these? And spoiler alert, it's not well. So he'll really dive into a lot of these things of how what we're putting into our bodies is affecting these gut microbes, and what keeps them happy, what leaves them feeling upset, and then things that, again, we can start doing right now. So with that, I'll share a little bit more about Professor Spector. So Tim Spector is a doctor. He's a medical doctor with a specialty area in rheumatology. He's also a professor of genetics, and he has done a lot of genetic study, especially on twins. He is director of the Twins UK Registry at King's College in London. But his current work focuses on the microbiome and diet. So he's kind of had a full spectrum of going from medical doctor and rheumatology to genetics and studying twins. And he's had this natural evolution that has brought him to nutrition and our gut microbiome. He's published more than 900 research articles. He is ranked in the top 1% of the world's most cited scientists by Thomson Reuters. He's the author of 4 popular science books. He has 2 recent books that I love. One is called The Diet Myth, and the other is Spoon Fed. I have both of these sitting here right in front of me. And he is also working with a company called Zoe that we'll be talking about that can actually help us to screen our microbiome, among other things. So he'll be sharing more about that as well. I actually will be doing the Zoe testing shortly, and Tim will be back on to review the results with me, which I'm really excited about. And also in our podcast, he will share with y'all the link as an invitation for our listeners to join along, do your own test with Zoe if you'd like. So lots to learn, lots to absorb, and to also be inspired by. And what I love about Tim is that he doesn't overcomplicate. It's things that are really simple stuff that we can start. And understanding more and more about our microbiome helps us understand why some of these behaviors and strategies are just so essential. So with that, welcome, Professor Spector. I'm excited for you to be with us.
Super excited to be on.
And are you okay with Tim? Do you prefer Professor Spector?
Tim's perfect.
Okay, great. So I have your books. I have followed what you do. I am fascinated by the research that you do, and also kind of the full spectrum that your career has spanned. So you're a medical doctor, you're a professor, you're a researcher. So how did you go from the specialty in rheumatology to genetics to this focus on nutrition and the microbiome? Like how did this transition happen both personally and professionally?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I know the real answer. It just sort of happened. I've always been inquisitive. So I've always had itchy feet and wanted to move from one problem to another. And when I sort of hit a block, I just look for another opportunity to where something new and exciting is happening and moving into that. And that's, so I was in mainstream rheumatology for a long time, but also doing a lot of research into the causes of arthritis and osteoporosis. But it was when I discovered twins about 28 years ago that things got exciting, because basically I realized you could answer so many questions just by studying one group of people because they were so unique. They were a unique natural experiment. And so that really led, by comparing identical and non-identical twins, nature v. nurture, you suddenly got to study genetics in a way no one else really can. And, each time I taught myself into it. And so up to about 10 years ago, it was mainly, I was really into the genetics. And then about 10 years ago, I had this sort of aha moment when I realized that why are identical twins often dying of different diseases at different times? They get, one can be overweight, the other one's skinny, one happy, one sad. And it struck me that must be something that's different about them. And it turns out that the main thing they were different on was their gut microbes. And so from that point on, I said, okay, that could explain, the curious effects of diet and why we're all quite unique. And twins are, the best way to illustrate that, a way that everyone understands. And so in a way, that's been the journey. And then I had to learn all about the microbiome, but luckily that having a genetics background helped that. And so it's just followed, and I've just had a career really of learning something new on cutting edge and applying it in science. And now I've got to the point I really want to apply everything I've learned in these science projects into practical advice for people rather than just writing more papers.
So being able to follow that passion and the interest, and I would imagine it's hard for you to turn it off because your mind, you were constantly asking questions, the curiosity. It seems like your work probably also largely overlaps with your personal, because it is so much something that it sounds like you're just like, you thrive on, that you enjoy so much.
Yeah, I'm very curious, but I'm also impatient, and I don't like routine. So So my research does mirror myself as a person. I'm always looking for a bit of adventure, a bit of excitement, a bit of risk. And that's why, in a way, I end up being rather multidisciplinary, because when you go into a new field, as an academic, everyone hates you for it. Right. And they don't like outsiders. They say, what's this guy coming here for? He doesn't know anything. I've been in this area 20 years. He doesn't, what's he got? It's not fair. And so, but often when you come in from the outside, you learn a new subject. And I researched my book for several years before they come out. you do get perspectives on an area that people often miss because they're too close to it. And this is very true in nutrition, as it is in many other branches of medicine. And I think this is, an advantage. And then in the new world of new technologies, it is very multidisciplinary, and people get stuck in ruts otherwise. So, yeah, it's turned out to be, I think, the most exciting time to be doing research into nutrition, which was labeled really the most boring subject in science. And now I think it's the most exciting.
It's such interesting stuff. It gives us so much to think about already. Let's pause for just a quick minute to talk about Coastal, one of our sponsors for this week's podcast episode. So you kind of want to buy glasses or sunglasses online, right? But you're worried about how they'll actually look. Coastal makes it so easy, though. We can browse and try on hundreds of frames instantly from wherever we are. Coastal also has this really cool advanced virtual try-on technology that is a blast to use. I love that we don't need to upload a photo of our face, but with Coastal, instead, we can just try on frames right then, right there by using our phone or computer's camera. And at coastal.com, you can get prescription glasses starting at $9 with free shipping and 60-day risk-free return. Just go to coastal.com, pick the frames you want, enter your prescription details, and your glasses will arrive in just a few days. And when you buy a pair, you can donate a pair to someone in need in just one click at no extra cost. To date, Coastal has donated more than 500,000 pairs of glasses to people in need across the world. Now, and for a limited time, they're offering Fueled listeners the best deal they have going anywhere. It's 30% off your first pair of glasses at coastal.com/fueled. Get free shipping, 60-day risk-free returns, and 30% off at coastal.com/fueled. Discount applied at checkout. It's only for a limited time. That's spelled coastal.com/fueled. Some restrictions apply. You're fortunate to have been able to, if you get comfortable, it sounds like, in one space and you're like, okay, you're comfortable and it might start to feel easy to you. Then you're like, okay, what's my next challenge? What's my next thing that I'm looking for? And as you started really researching the topic of our microbiome and talking about it, it wasn't something that was really talked about much in the mainstream medicine and mainstream media, but now it is. It's becoming something that is all of us are aware of. You're reading it in everyday type magazines. Our medical professionals are talking about it, but it's still something that is so vague for us. We can't see it. We can't really touch it. So help us to visualize our microbiome and what this all entails.
By definition, microbiome means you need a microscope to see it. So obviously you can't visualize it. But you have to have a mental image, really, of a new organ in your body that is like if you collected all the microbes in your gut, the trillions of them, and you squashed them together, it would weigh the same as your brain.
Which is wild.
So, yeah. So you put them all together, you take out the smelly bits, you flush them down the toilet, which is sort of half of them. And you're left with this squidgy mass, which you imagine is like a brain sitting inside your lower colon. And this is like a new organ you've just discovered in your body. And your food and everything and your blood wash through it, but it's really the center of your body. And that's also the core of Ayurvedic medicine as well. They always thought the gut was the heart. And it's turning out that this new organ in our bodies is like a chemical factory. It converts the thousands of chemicals in your food into tens of thousands of other chemicals that are key blood metabolites that circulate everywhere, that are vitamins, that are little neurochemicals that can make us happy or sad or full or hungry. And they're also key immune chemicals that tune our immune system perfectly to stop it overreacting or being ineffective against infections or viruses. So that's, I think, how people need to visualize it as this this clump of thousands of different microbes that are busily making lots of chemicals in our body. And if we think of it that way, then it puts food in a completely different light. It makes you think much more carefully about what you put in your mouth. You don't just regard it as fuel for your body. You need to regard it as, key fuel for your microbes. And what are they going to do with it? Are they going to be happy with your choice?
I think it helps to think of it almost as another organ, because we think, okay, I'm going to eat to protect heart health or liver health. What's going to help brain health? And so to start to think about that microbe health. And we'll be talking in a little bit about what can we do to optimize that gut microbiome. But first, let's talk a bit about what is the role of all of these, as you say, the trillions of microbes, and it's, to think about it being the weight of our brain, that's like 4 pounds. It's crazy to think that is all in our guts. And as you said, mostly in our lower intestines, but that's a lot.
It is, yeah. And it's very hard to weigh 40 to 100 trillion microbes together. But the scale of it is huge. And, every time we go to the toilet, we do become more human, because the ratio of microbial cells to our human cells changes. And so they're normally roughly equal.
Yeah,
but
wow.
you get rid of about half of them every time you go to the toilet. Although they're busy having sex and reproducing, and, getting those numbers back again. But it's the scale is enormous, and I think it is very hard for people to realize. But I think the chemical analogy is the best one.
Yeah.
These guys are just producing the most incredible chemicals that, in comparison, our body, we only have. We think around 20 odd human chemicals that our body cells produce to help us digest food. And our microbes have, tens of thousands.
And how do these chemicals affect our weight, our cravings, obesity? Because there's a strong correlation between gut health and weight, obesity, appetite, and then also our mood. So kind of walk us through how these are all so interrelated.
Yeah, so we know that when you compare people who are, say, healthy with those that are overweight or those that are depressed, we as a general rule find less microbes in the people that are unwell, and a more diverse set of microbes in those that are healthy. And that's really how we're defining a healthy set of gut microbes, is that you not only have the full range of your set, which includes the beneficial ones. So in the past, we were focused just on nasty bugs, which we thought were the problem. But now we realize that it's in a way the ratio of the good bugs to the bad bugs that's key. And what we're finding is that people who are overweight or obese, or who are actually depressed or anxious, not only have less microbes, but they have less of the good ones. So these are the ones that would damp down inflammation, or the ones that would less likely to provide chemical signals to all the immune cells. So it means that the immune system would be all overstimulated, and the whole process would really be in a state of stress, because then we're not getting all the calming chemicals that you get when you're healthy. I think that's the general rule. But what's interesting is when you look at something like depression or anxiety, they've shown that the change in the balance of microbes means that you have less microbes that produce some of the brain chemicals that keep your mood more stable, things like dopamine. And
which is just wild for people to imagine that your gut is producing these things that are these chemicals that are so correlated to what we normally associate with our brain.
Correct. We just magically thought our body somehow produced them, but we know that 90% of our dopamine is produced by our bugs when they're digesting food. So our body only takes over when we're not eating or we're fasting to do that. And there are many other examples like that, but I think the depression angle is a good one, because not only they produce these chemicals, but our bugs will also help us break down antidepressant drugs into the active ingredient. And if you lack a certain type of microbe, you won't have nearly an effective treatment with the antidepressants. So the microbes can also explain why we all react differently to different medicines, in the same way that, as we're going to discuss, that we react differently to foods.
Fascinating.
So,
yeah.
Both in the normal state and the disease state, a healthy microbiome is really crucial, and that's why there are now studies, probiotic studies, studies of giving people healthy, high fiber Mediterranean diets that show you can improve depression compared to control samples, as well as at the same level as you can with antidepressant drugs, just by shifting the gut microbe composition.
Yeah, and we've done a podcast on that, on specifically nutrition and the studies that's similar to what you're referencing. And so I'll link back to that in the episode notes of this podcast for anyone who wants to listen to that and kind of walks through some of that. So when we look at mood, again, these microbes are producing these chemicals that are directly related to how we're feeling. And then when we look at obesity, I'm looking in your book, The Diet Myth, and one of the things that you note is that these gut microbes are likely to be responsible for the obesity epidemic, and specifically our gut microbes, for many of us, are responsible for weight problems, and that they can be a better indicator for what we're going to look like or what our weight will be than really all of our genes combined.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, if I was given a microbe sample or a DNA sample and I wanted to, without knowing you, assess what your current state of health was, microbes win every time. And that, I think, is really important, because although they fluctuate a little bit day to day and month to month, the core set really is a really good predictor of health. And I think more and more we're going to be doing these sort of tests routinely. And the good side is, unlike your genes, you can change your diet and lifestyle to improve them. And that's a real positive message, because I think the old school genetic message, which is one I used to preach, is wrong on this. And
you got the bad, you drew the short straw. You had bad luck, bad genes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard to spin that in a positive way, other than giving people a way out to stay sort of unhappy. But I think this is a much more positive message, because it's not like saying genes aren't important. They do have a role, but all the data we're getting from our current personalized nutrition studies show that the vast majority of what we're seeing is reversible, and the rest of it sort of naturally follows.
Yeah. I think the idea that it's something that we have control over and our behaviors can impact it gives us much more hope, and it makes us want to be more proactive when we feel like it can really benefit. How does, going back to helping me visualize it, though, I think that, as you were talking about with mood, and that these chemicals are, the microbes produce chemicals like dopamine that help with that. What's the correlation there with these microbes and our gut microbiome and cravings, or, our hunger levels, or our weight? What's happening there in the messaging?
Well, there's no doubt that it's complicated, because but the microbes are involved at every stage, but they're not the only thing that's involved. So we do know that in animal experiments, you can, in sterile mice, you can put in different microbes that can change their appetite, and potentially you can sort of increase their wish to get more fats or, more junk food diets in a very artificial way. So we know it's possible in animals and some insects to change what types of food they want to eat by altering their microbes. So we know at some level it's possible. Obviously, what we don't know in humans is how big a role that is. But there is a theory that if you have a very inflammatory type microbiome, whereby this is a sort of diseased, stressed system that, for example, has lots of microbes that are good at eating fats, they will send signals to the brain to say, give me more of that food to eat. So that is really hard to demonstrate absolutely in humans, but it's definitely theoretically quite possible from all the animal experiments. But I think while that might play some role, I don't think that's the only role. I think what we're seeing in our other studies is that we know that if you have two identical calorie meals, one whole foods and one junk food, but equally tasty, similar calorie effect, people will eat more of the junk food one after eat. They'll be hungrier during the day. They'll overeat 20% of calories. And we also know from our own studies on the PREDICT study that we're doing with this company Zoe, that if you're a sort of person that gets a big sugar peak and then a sugar dip after eating, you will also eat 20% more that day eating that particular food. And both these, we know these peaks and these dips are also partly controlled by your gut microbes. And so we think that it's a combination of sensing what's going on in your body, plus the microbes sensing that and passing other signals to the brain that makes you have extra cravings. So it's a combination of how you react to the food, plus the composition of your microbes, sending chemicals to the brain. So this is a very new area, and it's, as you can imagine, pretty tough to do these kind of large-scale experiments in humans. In a way, what we eat does have a consequence, and there can be a chain of bad reactions. It explains why people eating lots of junk food tend to overeat and tend to eat the same and get a bit of a vicious circle with their gut microbes, then becoming more inflammatory, changing the environment so it's hard for other microbes to also coexist, and perhaps sending signals to say, give me more of that burger.
It's helping us to understand, we know the messaging that, of course, sugar sweetened drinks and these ultra refined packaged foods, processed foods aren't good for us. That's pretty evident. I think most people understand that, but they have such a powerful hold over so many of us. So I think this helps us to understand why. And then it also helps us to understand the why these aren't so good for us. When you start to look at it, really breaking it down to that level. I was also reading in your books that you were talking about, and this is something that, people may think is bizarre, but the fecal microbiome transplants. And so as you were saying that, in some of the animal studies, that you would see that based on their specific microbiome, they may have cravings for, higher fat or higher sugar foods. When there's the transplant of that, the recipient of that microbiome also often displays those same characteristics. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yes, I mean, there have been obviously hundreds of thousands of fecal transplants carried out in the US in the last 5 years, mainly for very severe infections called Clostridium difficile. And what's happened in a few cases early on before they did screening is that the sick person got better with the transplant, which works amazingly well. 90% of people are cured with it when they get a healthy person's microbiome. But a few started putting on weight and having strange food cravings. And it turns out that the donor was actually young, but as they got older, they became more obese and had this similar food cravings. So it looks like you can transmit these. So they can, obesity is infectious, if you like, as one way of looking at it. And we did an experiment where we had some overweight twins. some twins were overweight and their co-twin was skinny. And we took the microbes from the skinny one and put them into mice and found that it was very hard we overfed them with fats and sugars and everything, and they didn't get fat because they had these microbes that were protecting them. So definitely, there's something really fascinating in this, but fecal transplants don't work for everybody because
I'm thinking our listeners are going to be like, I've got that thin friend I've always envied. They're going to hit her up for a transplant.
Yeah, no, it ought to come with a health warning. So you don't want to pick someone who ends up being a serial killer or who was a secret bulimic and ends up,
right,
causing a problem you didn't know about. It was a dark family secret. So.
Because again, that microbiome dictates so much of our behaviors that we're not even aware of, right?
Yeah, and what's also true is that if you've got a fairly healthy one, so it works really well if you've got hardly any microbes, they're all sick, like in this Clostridium difficile. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to get it to work in people who are generally healthier and just say a bit overweight. We haven't found a way of the new guys taking over yet, and I think we still don't know enough about compatibility of different microbe sets, a bit like, blood donors or bone marrow donors. It's pretty much more complex, but it's working well in something called colitis, ulcerative colitis. About 1 in 4 people who have a donation get cured. And it's also working well in people on cancer therapy. So people having immune therapies, they've done this to people, even giving themselves their own poo before they had chemo and things like this. So all kinds of stuff is going on in the cutting edge of medicine here. So I think it sounds a bit of a joke, but it really is a useful therapy, but at the moment only for some people.
Right.
So not everyone can go and try it.
Right. And the situations, the conditions that you just described are things that are so extreme that the potential risk of something like this, the benefits still far outweigh it because these people are so sick or have such a need for it. And it's possible now for us to have our microbiome screened. And so how do we do that? How can we measure our gut microbes? And how is this available to the general population?
Yeah, so for a few years, you've been able to measure your microbiomes by the internet, in the same way you could get a DNA test. Basically, you send away and you get a sample kit and you send a stool back, and then a few weeks later you get your result. And it used to be done in a very simple way with just measuring one of the genes in the microbes, what we call 16S, which gave you a crude result, but not a very precise one. But now with this full sequencing of the microbiome, you get an incredibly detailed look that really is the cutting edge stuff. And there are not many companies in the US doing this, but there's one I'm working with called Zoe, which are based in Boston, who offer this as part of a more holistic package, so that this is coming all out of our research we've been doing for the last 3 years, looking at personalizing nutrition, but basically as part of a package with a glucose monitor, with blood pricks testing for looking at your blood fats and inflammation. You also get the microbiome, and you do for 10 days, do your own experiments, and then you get, not only do you get your microbiome results back, but also you get to know how you react to food, and then get a whole an app that tells you how, based on your results, we predict you're going to respond to these 500 different foods. And so you can then choose your foods based on your score and manage to lose weight that way without ever once talking about calories or restricting anything, simply by just swapping things around based on your own metabolism. The idea being that if you can reduce your sugar peaks, you can reduce your fat peaks, and you can optimize your gut microbes, then you've got it all working together. And, you've got a tool that is not just for 6 weeks, but is for the rest of your life.
And I have a Zoe kit. Is on his way to me. I'll be going through the testing and going through as a participant myself. And you guys have generously offered that either you or someone on your team will be able to talk through my results when I get those back. So we'll have another podcast on that. So I'm excited just to experience it, go through it, kind of see what the process is like, and then we'll be kind of sharing that on here. So I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, and I mean, some people say that, just the first time you put on that glucose monitor and you can start seeing in real time how food is interacting with your own body and your own microbes, how sort of empowering it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine it's life-changing for many.
Because you don't have to believe just what some food gurus told you, right, or what's on a food label or an advert. You can actually see it yourself, and I think that really is the future. And so I think it's super exciting, and that's why I'm so excited about nutrition at the moment, because it's just all these things have come together at once. You've got the microbiome, you've got the new technology like these devices, and you've got big computers that can put all this complexity, back into an app that you can everyone can understand. So it's going to change all our ideas about food, I think.
And you're right that we can read all the research papers, we can hear it from experts talking about it, but to actually see it right there physically, how we're responding. We don't have to guess, kind of maybe I'm feeling a little this or this way, or a little high or a little low. You're seeing it, the direct correlation between what you're putting in your body and what's happening. So when we're looking at, the microbiome is, far more critical, plays a huge role in every aspect of our body. You were joking that if you were going to get something like a microbiome transplant, you wouldn't want it to come from a serial killer. But that's also telling of just how, when we look at mood, when we look at all of these things that the microbiome is driving in our behaviors, it's tremendous. So what are how do we optimize all these microbes? What are some of the things that we can do starting today to help to optimize this?
So obviously there's two ways of answering the question. One is, you can take these tests like the Zoe test, and you'll get a report on the 15 good and the 15 bad microbes that we know everybody has in different amounts that correlate to your health. And then they'll give you some idea about which foods you need to boost and which need to suppress and which you want to avoid to reduce the number of bad ones. But not everyone can do that test or afford it. So there are some generic ideas here that, in a way, everyone can do to improve their gut health. And the idea is the number one concept is to diversify. You just want as many different gut microbes on your side, giving you the biggest menu of chemicals you can find, which gives you the flexibility to be healthy. And so there are a few simple rules to do that. And the first one I say, and the most important, is to try and eat 30 plants a week, 30 different plants, not 30 types of kale. You're talking, and people say, "Oh, I can't do that. That's crazy." But people forget what a plant is. Most of what we eat are plants, and a nut is a plant, a seed is a plant, herbs are plants. And so once you start thinking in that way, and you start sprinkling nuts and seeds on your yogurt in the morning, or put extra things on your salad, it's actually quite easy to do that. And it also encourages you to look for new things to eat, which, your body always likes eating new things. Your microbes do anyway. So that should become part of your philosophy. Don't get caught in a rut. Try something new every week. Second thing I tell people is to eat fermented foods in some form every day. It has to be just a small shot, whether it's standard full fat, yogurt without any preservatives or sugars in it, whether it's kefir, kombucha, which is fermented tea, or the krauts or kimchi. Then it's picking foods high in polyphenols. Now, these are the brightly colored these are the natural defense chemicals in plants that used to be called antioxidants, but we now know they work via the microbes. They're basically rocket fuel for your microbes. And so always try and think, does this have any polyphenols in it? And, iceberg lettuce, for example, has no polyphenols. And that's why it lasts forever in the fridge. But plenty of stuff that you wouldn't think does have high polyphenols, and these are all in the book. Things like peanuts, cashews, seeds, dark chocolate over 70%, cheese, red wine. So things that are unexpected and bitter and brightly colored, all the berries, they're fantastic for polyphenols and fiber as well. So it just makes you think in a different way about what a good food is, and you can do this without ever thinking about calories. That's the cool thing. And then on the negative side, you just want to avoid ultra processed foods regularly. It doesn't mean you can never have them, but just have them only occasionally while you build up your gut microbes, because they act to mess up your gut microbes and reduce diversity. They're the microbes' foe, really, including artificial sweeteners, including emulsifiers, preservatives, etc. All these things they wouldn't have come across in nature. And then the other thing I think, which is an emerging area, is giving your gut a rest. So giving it long periods where it's not eating, and move away from the American way of having 5 or 6 meals a day as snack events, to just trying to have 2 major meal events, and try and give yourself at least 14 hours overnight when you're not eating. The microbes really like the fasting, and that's probably one major reason why these extended fasting periods work so well on your metabolism, is that microbes come out at night when you're not eating, and they clean up your gut lining of your bowel, and they improve the immune system and stop it leaking, etc. So that's really important. You've got to give them a rest.
So something like intermittent fasting is essentially giving our gut microbes time for their necessary housekeeping.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's how we probably lived, 10,000 years ago.
Right.
Hunter-gatherers have no words for snack or breakfast, because they just had several big meals a day. They didn't they weren't starving when they woke up in the morning, and nor are we. It's just Mr. Kellogg that's told us to do that.
Right, exactly. The clock. So optimizing our microbiome with real foods, whole foods. And I think by you saying, okay, number one, diversify, that's huge, because a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm aware of gut health. I eat a carton of yogurt every day. Well, that's the same. You're not diversifying there. But when you introduce yogurt and kombucha and the different types of sauerkraut, and you're introducing different products, that's what we're talking about diversifying. And then I like that you kind of put that challenge out there of 30 different types of plants, 30 different species of plants each week, because what that naturally does is it gets us into the real food, whole foods, the fiber-rich foods with their prebiotics that are serving as that fuel for the probiotics. But instead of just the message of eat more fiber, it's actually a lot more specific, and I think a lot more fun to think about how am I going to introduce 30 different plants each week. It's kind of a little bit of a different challenge than just the traditional messaging of eat more fiber.
Yeah, I want to move away from these traditional messages because in a way, we've been stuck with this very limited view of nutrition as calories, fats, sugars, fiber, and it dumbs down the whole area and complexity of food to such a level that it just doesn't work anymore, because the food companies come up with some workaround and they say something's high in fiber and low in fat, and it's just rubbish.
That was one of the questions that I actually was going to ask you about is, what are we unnecessarily overcomplicating? But on the flip side, what are we oversimplifying. And I've heard you refer to it as reductionist nonsense. And I love it. That's, I don't know if you guys have this in the UK, but we have these things like Fiber One bars and Fiber One brownies. It's a candy bar or it's a brownie, and they're just adding the isolated fiber in the form of inulin. And people think they're meeting their fiber goals for the day, or they're eating something healthy because it is reduced to the message of eat more fiber.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And, and the same is true with protein. They just add a bit of some soy protein, high in protein, because people at the moment think protein's healthy. But it's everything is designed to disguise the fact that is just an ultra processed food you're eating. And, you can't, you can't just camouflage everything in this way forever. And I think it's got to end. And I think the great example of adding inulin is that when they've done all the studies giving inulin to people in clinical trials, which normally it should be a good thing. You double the fiber levels, but if it's just with inulin, you end up actually reducing the diversity of the gut microbes, because it gets dominated by the one species that just is really the best at eating inulin and getting fat and reproducing, and the other guys get squeezed out. So that's really the lesson here. Is it's a bit, you can't substitute the diversity of real food just with some supplements.
So our messaging here is, let's stop oversimplifying it. Let's avoid the reductionist nonsense, as you say. I also heard you say that, and I don't like kind of looking at it through this lens of we shouldn't gauge the quality of food by calories or fat or sugar or fiber. Like just because something has that label smacked on it that's high protein, high fiber, zero sugar, gluten-free, these call outs give it that health halo for us, but that doesn't mean that is a wholesome, nourishing product.
And it's usually, things that need that to sell it have got something to hide, generally.
Right. When they're doing the brag points.
You should be able to look at the food and say, hey, that looks healthy. You wouldn't need a label to tell you.
So much interesting stuff already. Thank you. And I want to pause for just a quick minute to talk about Coastal, one of our sponsors for this week's podcast episode, and an Allure Best of Beauty winner. Self-care and routine are more important than ever. Whatever you're using to get ready for the day should make you feel amazing. Billy has recreated everyday essentials by delivering premium razors and high-performing body care directly to you. Go to mybilly.com to get their starter kit for just $9. That includes their award-winning razor, 2 refill blades, and a cult favorite magnetic holder. I love Billy's products, and you will too. They leave our skin feeling so soft. And to express a little love for our show, go to mybilly.com/fueled. It's a small way that you can support us while also getting the best razor you will ever own. It's just $9 to get your starter kit plus free shipping always. Go to mybilly.com/fueled. That's spelled mybillie.com/fueled. So let's talk a little bit about sweeteners, or actually a lot about sweeteners and the impact of sweeteners, including sugar, but also other types of sweeteners on our gut microbes. And so if we can kind of give us a run through of sugar, artificial sweeteners, and looking at artificial sweeteners like the pink, yellow, blue, saccharin, sucralose, and aspartame, but then also some of the newer, they're not newer, but plant-based sweeteners like erythritol, or stevia, monk fruit. How do you rank these as far as their effect on our gut microbes?
Well, we know more about some of them than others, but in experiments, all of them have, at least in some experiments, been shown to be harmful for our gut microbes in terms of reducing their diversity or making them produce chemicals that are regarded as harmful. And I think this probably explains why the clinical trials, when you compare adults or kids being given diet sodas versus regular sodas, they don't lose any weight or get less diabetes, because in a way these chemicals are going to the microbes are reacting in a bad way, and they're sending off signals to the rest of the body that says, sending off pro-diabetic, pro-obesity signals. And that, because obviously they're getting less calories. In general, these trials look at 2 cans a day, so roughly 300 calories less. Those kids and adults should be leaner, but they're not. So either it makes them overeat from some of these signals as well, or it's actually changing the metabolism. So I think the more we look at it, the more we see these subtle but very permanent changes to the gut microbes that are the reason we shouldn't be just swapping sugar for these artificial sweeteners. And I'm really worried about the trend of mixing them up so they're confusing.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard to know if you're what you're drinking, particularly some of these sports drinks and things where they mix them up, and I think they're just. My big worry is they're sensitizing kids to have ever sweeter and sweeter palates.
Exactly. Everything doesn't, your yogurt doesn't taste like yogurt. It tastes like candy. Your cereal tastes like candy. What about I would think that things like sugar alcohols, though, the erythritol or the fructooligosaccharides that are often in the natural plant-based sweeteners, I would think that those would have not a harmful effect on our gut bacteria. But what is your experience with this?
I think that's broadly correct, but I don't. Having said that, I don't think there have been sufficient studies to prove that. Obviously, the manufacturers are not keen to do the studies, and it's very hard to raise money in places like the US to do that kind of work, because the manufacturers just want to show that it's safe. And you do need quite big numbers because of the differences between people. To do a really good microbiome study, you do need hundreds of people, and the average nutrition study is done on about 20 people. But there are studies, for example, where they've done this in a laboratory and done sort of fake guts, where they've dropped these chemicals in and seen the effects. Nearly all of them do have some effects in that. But I think generally sucralose, aspartame seem to be the ones that are the more worrying. And things like stevia and these other natural alcohols so far have been less worrying, but I think we still aren't studying them properly.
So I think for our listeners, we usually I encourage plant-based, natural, no-calorie sweeteners like those that you just said, and then avoiding the artificial, like you said, the sucralose, which is Splenda, aspartame, which is equal, and saccharin, which is sweet and low. Also, asulfame potassium is another one. What about the sweeteners that a lot of people will put under this clean label umbrella? Coconut sugar and maple syrup specifically, sometimes agave. I look at these as simply still refined added sugars, but when it comes to our gut microbes, how would you compare a coconut sugar or a maple syrup to just sucrose?
I think our microbes see them just as the same chemical and see it as nonsense.
So nonsense. That messaging is hard to combat because, people will be like, oh, well, I made these baked whatever I'm baking, but I used maple syrup or I used coconut sugar. And we're like, it's still just sugar. And regardless, as you said, too, we would benefit kids and adults to gradually start to wean ourselves off of these ultra sweet foods, whatever the sweetener source.
That's exactly right. And the sugars get absorbed very early on in the gut process. So they never really get to where most of the microbes are in your lower colon. And this is just a disguise. Sometimes there might be other things in something sweet. I mean, like honey, for example. I'm not ruling out there might be some extra benefits of honey, but there's no doubt you're also eating a hell of a lot of sugar as well. Right. So you have to, and your teeth will fall out if you eat too much honey. However, other magical properties it may have.
And I know that you and I are running close on our time. But I wanted to ask your opinion on a couple of popular diets. So intermittent fasting, we've already covered, and the benefit that can have to giving those microbes time for that housekeeping that they need during that window of fasting. By the way, I'm an advocate of intermittent fasting. It does feel very effective for a lot of people. You know how it's called, you have your fasting window and then what is often referred to as the feeding window. I don't like that phrase. I think feeding window seems odd. So we actually call it our fueling window. So I wanted to just share that. I think that sounds a lot better than feeding window.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm in a zoo in a feeding window.
Yes. If you want to use
much too much controlling. So I think I generally call it, I just call it a way of restricted time eating. Is another way. RTE is another word. So there's lots of different terms for it, but I think everyone should try this once in a while, even if you don't do it every day, just see how you feel, because what we learned from these PREDICT studies with Zoe is that everybody really is unique. And, our responses to food vary, tenfold in normal people. And whether you get sugar dips or highs, or whether you metabolize better in the morning or the evening, is really very individual. And all these rules that we were taught are actually wrong. They were only based on, 9 nutrition students 30 years ago. And so we've got to really look at the whole stuff. And the best way to do this is to self-experiment, work out, are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Should you be having a high-fat breakfast, a high-carb breakfast? Should you be exercising before or after your meal? What suits you best? There is no absolute guideline. And the more people just embrace this idea that, in a way, our relationship with food is a lifelong experiment, the better, and keep an open mind.
I think that's the hardest part for people, is keeping the open mind, because we get so impassioned about what we think, if we have something that works for us, we become just so passionate about it. And almost you'll see a lot of people become judgmental or critical of those that don't follow or align with those beliefs. And food almost becomes a religion for this. And so to have that flexibility, to understand that there is so much variability and that what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you, it takes a lot, because we really hold these things very close. And, it's a very volatile topic for many.
Yeah, no, and I think we are really dealing with multiple religions now that are, as we're replacing mainstream religion in many people. People like to belong to groups that have very strong views, but I think the science is unequivocal that we are very, very different to each other, and there are lots of ways of eating healthily and lots of different ways of eating unhealthily. But we can't force our views on other people, other than saying, gut health is good for everybody, and experimentation and discovering what works best for you is really where you should be. And we do know that, for most people, the old-fashioned ways like calorie control or low-fat diets have failed miserably.
And as you said, we don't want to gauge the quality of our food by calories, fat, sugar, and then optimizing our microbiomes by diversifying those, adding those plants every week, the fermented foods. I do want to ask, I meant to ask this earlier, supplementation with probiotics. My recommendation is to try to get it through real whole food. And especially if you're going to buy a probiotic that's refrigerated, but in that case, you're only getting the same strain over and over and over. And if you're buying it that's just sitting on the shelf and not refrigerated, who knows how long it's been there, or if it's really got live active cultures. So my recommendation is usually passing on the supplements and, when possible, getting it from whole foods. But what's your take on that?
No, I broadly agree with you. I think that's exactly right. Some people do find it hard, for example, to, if they don't like dairy, it can be hard to have your yogurt or your kefir. And so those people might, or if they're sick or taking antibiotics, might want to take a probiotic. And I think the key is to try and select ones that have as many different species as possible. So not just the same species, because it's all a lottery whether that's going to work for you or not. Whereas if you cover your bases more by mixing them up a bit, and that's what most manufacturers don't do. They don't have multi-species one. They just focus on a few that they can patent.
Great point. So it's not a bad thing to take it, and it can almost be an insurance for people. Look for them in the refrigerated sections to truly have those live active cultures. But then the best is to optimize this microbiome through the real whole foods. And Tim, what are some of our last takeaways for our listeners? If there's things we haven't covered that you would say to try to help us shift that mindset?
I just think it's, I tell people, if you're going to start somewhere with self-experimentation, then something like looking at your breakfast is a good way to go, because there's around the world, everyone has a different breakfast. And in the US, it's very limited compared to other countries. So first work out, try skipping breakfast, see how you feel, see what your energy levels are like, see what your appetite levels are like at lunch. Try changing it if it's a high carb breakfast, try changing it for a high fat breakfast. Try moving it back a few hours so that, you have a very early lunch. And as I said, you can practice exercising before it or after it. And these are ways that you start to get to know your own body and your own metabolism. And each time you're eating anything, just think that, you're never dining alone. You're eating with 100 trillion microbes. And so, don't be selfish. Give them what they want. Don't just always have what you want to eat. And I think that's the key here. So it's you are unique, but so are your microbes, and give them what they deserve. And if you do that, generally you're going to have a healthy diet, and it's also going to be good for the planet. So it's a pretty good mantra to work with.
This is all incredible information. It's inspiring for me to hear it. And I know for our listeners as well. I'll link to where people can find more about what you're doing, to your books, Spoon Fed and The Diet Myth, and also Zoe. And then I look forward to talking with you guys when I get my Zoe results back too. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk through this with us.
It's been my pleasure. And if anyone wants to get the Zoe product test at the same time as you, Molly, they can go to the joinzoe.com website, and if you /Tim, they can get on that wait list.
Okay, great. And we didn't say this earlier, but it's $360. Am I right about that?
I think that's right. Spread over 6 months, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll put the link to that as well for our listeners. Okay, incredible. Thank you so much.
Okay, go and have fun, everyone. Enjoy.
I'm so honored and so grateful to Tim for joining us today. There's so much that we can learn from him, so much that can help us with our whole body wellness in ways that we cannot even imagine. As mentioned, I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode, including the link that Tim gave us for Zoe for our listeners, and also to his books Spoon Fed and The Diet Myth. And y'all heard how practical and real world and straightforward he is, and these books are exactly that way as well. I highly recommend them. And let me know what you think as you start making changes and as you start eating and thinking of all those trillions of friends in your belly. Like he said, we're not eating alone when we're eating. Let me know how it's going as you incorporate these strategies into your own life. I always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.